Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we'll be looking at who Nosferatu is. One of the most iconic, fascinating, interesting, grotesque, and terrifying vampires we've seen in the world of cinema is Count Orlok, also known as the Bird of Death, and erroneously called Nosferatu in popular culture. This character is the main antagonist in the 1922 film titled Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. Furthermore, he reappears in the 2024 remake of Nosferatu, directed by the talented horror filmmaker Robert Eggers. Count Orlok is a fascinating vampire because he has a much more demonic and sinister origin compared to other vampires in modern cinema. He is an extremely dangerous creature that carries and spreads plagues and diseases among humans, essentially being a harbinger of death. Due to these sinister origins, his iconic character, and his memorable role in the history of cinema, Count Orlok is considered one of the best monstrous villains and vampires in the horror genre, on par with Dracula. It is important to note that Nosferatu was originally an unofficial adaptation of the character of Dracula. In this video, I'll explain in detail the story and origins of Count Orlok in Nosferatu. I will provide a complete summary of his role in the original film, as well as a brief explanation of the new adaptation from 2024. I will also discuss his physical appearance, what we know about his personality and behavior, as well as his incredible abilities and weaknesses. In the original 1922 film, there is no explanation of where Count Orlok comes from. However, additional DVD and Blu-ray materials, as well as old interviews with the director, reveal more about the mythology of Nosferatu. According to the Book of Vampires, Orlok is an incarnate evil and demonic spirit, the son of the demon Belial, one of Satan's most powerful lieutenants. Although no detailed explanation is given, it is suggested that he is a being half demon and half human, similar to concepts like Hellboy, who was born of a human mother who made a pact with a demon. This explains why Orlok has a physical body and why he is a grotesque and parasitic vampire, rather than a romantic and beautiful figure. Orlok resides in a deteriorating castle in the Carpathian Mountains of Eastern Europe. From there, he has stalked nearby towns and villages for centuries, terrorizing their inhabitants and spreading plagues through rats. These local legends have made it so that no one dares venture into the mountains or go out at night for fear of the Nosferatu vampire. In the new adaptation, the plot follows Helen, who prays for love and awakens an inhuman entity that marks her with a terrifying vision. Years later, Helen is married to Thomas Hutter, a real estate agent who travels to close the sale of a castle to the mysterious Count Orlok, leaving his wife under the care of his old friend Friedrich and his wife Anna. During his stay, Orlok hypnotizes him, feeds on his blood, and discovers a photo of Helen, recognizing her as someone who promised him loyalty in the past. Thomas discovers that Orlok is a vampire and tries to kill him, but the Count pursues him until Thomas escapes by jumping into the river. Meanwhile, Helen suffers from seizures, and Dr. Sievers turns to his mentor, von Franz, who deduces that Orlok is mentally controlling her. Thomas, wounded, recovers in a church and rushes back upon learning that Orlok threatens Helen. Orlok travels on a ship filled with dirt from his homeland, massacring the crew before reaching Wisborg. There, he mentally controls Helen and demands that she promise herself to him willingly. Helen resists, but Orlok threatens to destroy her loved ones and the city. The plague that the Count brings with him claims more victims, including Anna, her daughters, and Friedrich. Helen, realizing that only her sacrifice can stop Orlok, willingly gives herself up. Meanwhile, von Franz and Thomas try to destroy his resting place, but they fail. Orlok begins to feed on Helen until, at dawn, he bleeds out and dies. Helen also succumbs, sacrificing herself to save Wisborg. Thomas, devastated, holds her in her final moments, while von Franz affirms that her heroic act freed the city from the curse of Nosferatu. In the Book of Vampires, it is mentioned, "From the seed of Belial came the vampire Nosferatu, who lives and feeds on human blood. In the 1922 film, Count Orlok is presented as a rich nobleman who wants to move from the Carpathian Mountains to Wisborg, Germany, to live among society. Although he has a luxurious castle, the local people avoid coming near. The protagonist, Thomas Hutter, an assistant to a real estate agent in Wisborg, is sent to the Count's castle to show him properties in the city and close a deal for a house across from Hutter's residence. However, Thomas's boss, named Nock, is under the mental control of Count Orlok, which complicates matters in a sinister way. He sent him a letter with a type of spell or special charm that placed him under his control and turned him into his servant. That's why he is helping his master carry out his plan. Initially, Thomas Hutter, when he arrives in the area, cannot get anyone to take him to Count Orlok's castle. However, after some time, Count Orlok himself, disguised as a servant, picks him up and takes him to the castle. There, the Count meets Thomas, and they carry out the negotiations for the property that he is interested in purchasing, which had already been discussed with the real estate agent from Wisborg named Nock. During dinner, when Thomas is trying to cut bread, he accidentally cuts himself, which awakens Orlok's hunger for blood. Therefore, the Count tries to suck the wound of the young man. However, Thomas does not allow it. Later that night, the Count bites Thomas on the neck and feeds on his blood. The next morning, Thomas does not remember what happened or who bit him, so he thinks the marks on his neck are from mosquitoes or some unknown insect from the mountains. For this reason, he does not think much of it until he finds a book about vampires and their mythology, previously found in a hotel where he had stayed. Upon reading the book, Thomas begins to suspect that Count Orlok could be a vampire. His wife, Helen, who has telepathic powers, senses that her husband is in danger. One night, when the Count tries to feed again on Thomas, Helen intervenes telepathically, distracting the Count and making him focus on her instead of attacking her husband again. Soon after, Count Orlok locks himself in a large box filled with earth from his castle, a sort of special coffin, and travels to Wisborg on a ship as part of the cargo. Thanks to the servants and people under his control, he manages to have himself transported. During the journey, Orlock begins to kill the members of the crew indirectly through rats carrying a supernatural plague that sickens and kills everyone, except the first officer and the captain. When the first officer checks the cargo area, Orlock wakes up and leaves his coffin. Horrified at seeing the creature, the officer jumps off the ship into the sea. The captain, noticing what has happened, ties himself to the helm in an attempt to reach land to escape the evil on his ship. However, the Count also kills him, feeding on his blood and temporarily satisfying his hunger. Upon arriving in Wisborg, Orlock spreads the plague through the rats, causing many deaths in the community. This leads the authorities to declare a quarantine due to the plague and collective hysteria, as many believe it is the work of a death-bringer and an evil being. Thomas and Helen, desperate over the situation, come up with a plan to stop the vampire. Helen, aware that Orlock has been attracted to her since their first telepathic contact, uses it as a distraction. With the help of some villagers, they set a trap for Nosferatu, drawing him toward Helen. She allows him to attack her and feed on her blood, something the Count enjoys so much that he loses track of time. At dawn, upon hearing the roosters crow, Orlock tries to escape, but the sun's rays reach him, burning and destroying his physical body. Only a large cloud of fire and smoke remains, thus ending the vampire creature and his reign in the Carpathian Mountains and Eastern Europe. As you can see, the story in the original film and the 2024 version has some differences, but it maintains the main story and the core content of the work. Count Orlok has an iconic and memorable physical appearance. He is a tall and very thin man, bald, with thick and prominent eyebrows, two rat-like, fang-like teeth protruding from his mouth, bulging and strange eyes, large and pointed ears, and a big, pointed nose. These features make him look more like a humanoid bat than a human being. Now that we've covered his story, let me tell you about his personality, behavior, abilities, weaknesses, and interesting facts related to this fascinating character and his film. He also has 2 large, bony hands with very long fingers that appear unnatural. On his fingers, Count Orlok has somewhat long nails when he presents himself as a noble but eccentric man. However, when he gives in to his more vampiric side, the creature extends the claws from his fingers, which are very long and sharp, giving him a rather monstrous and inhuman appearance. Count Orlok always wears a dark coat with black pants and shoes. On occasions, when he wants to appear more human, he wears a large, thick jacket over all his clothing, along with a characteristic hat with a feather. All of these physical traits make Count Orlok, or Nosferatu, appear as a very terrifying and strange being, as he is pretending to be human. Count Orlok has a personality that seems simple, but it is not. Nosferatu is a more demonically essenced being, which is why he is a cruel, ruthless, and evil vampire who enjoys a twisted and macabre fun in unleashing chaos and death, spreading his plagues across Europe and using his rats. In all the areas near where he lives, he is also very intelligent, as he behaves like a nobleman in front of Thomas Hutter and manages to suppress his vampiric tendencies on several occasions. Moreover, he becomes obsessed with Helen, whom he wants to suck the blood from. Although, in a way, he develops a very peculiar fascination with her. He really doesn't care about anyone or anything other than himself. He only sees the humans and animals he controls as mere tools to use to achieve a goal and as food sources. All of this shows us that he is a complex being with an animalistic side, but also a colder and more calculating one. That's why Nosferatu is so terrifying and memorable. Count Orlok, or Nosferatu, possesses some incredible abilities that make him a very difficult being to defeat for humans. First of all, he is an extremely intelligent being due to his old age. Moreover, this intelligence has allowed him to survive for hundreds, if not thousands, of years without being discovered, and without anyone being able to really attack or threaten his life. This creature, being a more demon-like entity, is a bringer of death, so he carries plagues and diseases through his rats. He can also manipulate the animals he chooses and control them in a certain way. The same goes for humans, whom he can possess to some extent, brainwashing them and forcing them to do his bidding. He has superhuman reflexes and agility. Additionally, he has telekinetic powers, meaning he can move things with his mind. He also has umbrakinesis, which means he can manipulate his shadow at will without any problem or restriction, even if it's separated from his body. He has aerokinesis, which allows him to control the air and weather. This creature can induce complete madness in the animals and humans who come into direct contact with him in his monstrous vampire form. Moreover, he also has superhuman strength and speed, with very sharp claws that seem to be retractable. He has large, infectious fangs that allow him to transmit his plague and diseases at will. Despite these incredible abilities, Count Orlok does have some important weaknesses. First and foremost, the sun can burn him and destroy his physical body. It is this that ultimately defeats and kills him. Although it is important to note that Nosferatu cannot die from a stake through the heart, like other vampires. Another weakness he has is the obsession he develops with a woman pure of heart, in this case Helen Hutter, and the desire to feed on her pure blood. This is a weakness of the creature, because if hypnotized, it can leave him vulnerable to fall into a trap. It is very interesting to mention that Count Orlok and his film Nosferatu were created as an unofficial adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula and the author's original novel, a masterwork of Gothic horror. However, since the German film studio could not obtain the copyright, they chose to create their own version of the character. Although, once the wife of the late Bram Stoker became aware, she sued the film studio, who didn't have the money to pay her compensation because the silent film had been a complete box office failure. As a result, A judge ordered all copies of the film to be destroyed, which the studio did. Fortunately, some fragments of the film remained in the hands of private collectors, and over time, a very faithful cut of the original movie was created. This is why we can watch the film today. Another fascinating aspect is that in popular culture and film, Nosferatu and Dracula became very different characters. With Dracula, he is always shown as a charming, elegant gentleman, very smooth with his words, being deceptive but at the same time inspiring some trust. Whereas Count Orlok from Nosferatu is more faithful to Bram Stoker's original book and is a more demonically essenced being, a type of parasitic creature for humans who only seeks to feed on their blood and spread his diseases and plagues wherever he goes. Something curious is that Nosferatu's weakness to the sun is something that was added in this film, and it is not mentioned in Bram Stoker's original Dracula book. However, this has stayed as a weakness for all vampires in modern cinema and literature. Another curiosity is that Count Orlok has inspired many of the vampires we've seen in the horror genre. For example, this creature inspired the Master in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it shares a somewhat similar aesthetic. The character of Hector from the Castlevania video game series was also inspired by Nosferatu, as they share a similar aesthetic, and Hector is a more monstrous vampire character. He also inspired Kurt Barlow from the film Salem's Lot by Tobe Hooper, which is an adaptation of Stephen King's novel, and influenced Guillermo del Toro in creating the vampire leader Eli Damaskinos and his son Jared Nomak, along with the grotesque and brilliant Reapers in Blade 2. Additionally, it slightly influenced the design and concept of the Master in the entertaining and epic series The Strain. Moreover, Guillermo del Toro preserved the more demonic and parasitic side of these creatures in The Strain, just like in Nosferatu. Also, Count Orlok has appeared several times in SpongeBob SquarePants and other animated series, making brief cameo appearances, which is how many of us first encountered him. And well, that's all we know about Count Orlok from Nosferatu. Honestly, I think this vampire is one of the most brilliant, memorable, and terrifying we've seen in the horror genre, because Max Schreck's performance in the film is quite good. It is known that he never broke character until the filming was complete. Plus, he had a very grotesque and brilliant design for that time, which makes him very memorable. Although the original film is over 100 years old since its release, I believe it is one of the best, because it was the first film to show us a vampire. It has also positively influenced genres like fiction and horror, from cinema to literature, video games, and television. That's why I think Count Orlok is one of the best vampires and monsters we've seen in cinema. But let me know your opinion in the comments below. Did you already know Count Orlok from Nosferatu? Were you familiar with his story and his more demonic origins? And finally, how did you come to know this character? Did you first see him, like I did, through SpongeBob when you were a child, or did you see the silent film or the 1979 adaptation of the character? Comment below with your answer to these questions and your general opinion about Count Orlok from the legendary film Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I truly appreciate it. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and share it to support the channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of my new videos.